how how much will this do to help the global climate change? There are those people who say, well, it's going to take forever, and Oregon is an infinitesimally small part of the carbon emissions, so why do it?
We've heard that comment over and over. Oregon obviously is not the largest emitter out there. The United States is right up there, as is China. But I was surprised to learn recently just exactly how we do stack up. The estimate is that in terms of global contribution to emissions, carbon emissions, Oregon produces about 0.4 to 0.5%, so around 0.5% annually. So that's not a small amount. When we compare to other countries' carbon footprints, that amount, that 62 to 72,000 metric tons a year, or 62 million metric tons a year, rather, we rank about 1/20th of all the countries in the world. So we definitely are right in the mix. And remember, those other countries have signed on to the Paris Accords. It's only our federal government that has pulled us out right now. So we are asking little countries with equivalent carbon footprints like Portugal to do their part, but we're not going to do ours. And I think that really resonates with the citizens of Oregon that are concerned with climate change. And so with the federal government failing to acknowledge that climate change is here and damaging our economy and our landscape, the states are on the front lines. And if we don't step up, I don't know who is. You know, there are cities that have these same objectives, and that's great. Portland has been talking about this type of approach for a long time. That's great. But we need large landscapes and large populations to get behind that, and states are the next best thing.
The Senate leadership in the legislature indicated that this likely is too complex to pass in this session. The Democratic House leadership did not indicate it. What do you see happening with this in the short session of 2018?
We've already set our hearings for next week, as you probably know. We'll spend the first two meetings of both the Senate Environment and Natural Resources Committee and the House Energy and Environment Committee in joint committee sessions working on this. Picking up from where we left off in the interim legislative days and our work group sessions last fall, further explaining the bill, allowing both public testimony and invited testimony by sector so that we get a reaction from those entities about the actual language of the bill. Then we expect both bills to go to Ways and Means. Probably with the Senate bill in an amended form that takes in some comments that we received since the work sessions closed up and now. And then we hope that because this does cost a little bit of money and there are further negotiations to be done about policy that impact the budget, that we'll be able to reach a consensus at Ways and Means and then send that back to both sides of the House. There's no doubt that this is a heavy lift on the Senate. What I don't agree with, but let me back up a minute. You know, the Senate and the senators and the Senate president care deeply about the state, just like I do. And so their caution, I think, is about what's best for the state. And as we've moved through the last year, Senator Dembro and I have seen both legislators and advocates and the public and industry, frankly, get better educated about what this program is and become, I think, maybe not comfortable enough to come out and say yes, but comfortable enough to say, okay, we can be talking about this. This seems like a viable route. So taking all of those things, what I would ask is that these senators that care deeply about our state take a real careful look at the bills, because it's not that complicated. Running the trading market might be complicated, but we don't have to figure it all out. A lot of that work's been done in the linking of the system, of our system with the Western Climate Initiative. We'll work out some of the details of that. We're not required to just follow lockstep with California. We have opportunities to tweak the program so it suits us. And I think once folks that haven't fully engaged in looking at the information were to engage, they'll see that we're ready. Senator Denbrough makes a great point at public forums when he says, these two bills right now, before session, are where we would be in May of a long session. They're that well vetted, they're that well chewed on. We just have to get folks to stop being afraid and start reading the bills.
Is there any Republican support in the legislature for this?
Not so far.
What happened to the idea of joining with Washington and British Columbia?
That's a great question, and it has to do with the difference between pursuing a carbon tax methodology versus a cap and invest or cap and trade methodology. We've been studying this for even longer as a state than we've looked at cap and trade. British Columbia had the most successful system until recently, until they had to do a little bit of a reset, is my understanding. And that is they found that the carbon tax really wasn't effective in lowering emissions. In the early days, what a carbon tax does is say you're going to pay a tax per ton to the government, and that's supposed to be an incentive to lower emissions. And the way that you help both consumers and businesses to make that work for them is you continuously reset the benefits and burdens through rebates or tax rates. And so they were continuously tweaking their program so that the program continued to work and everybody was happy. The problem for Oregon with that approach, as you know, as we've all experienced over and over, is that changes to our tax structure almost always have to go to the ballot. And so what I say is Oregon lacks tax nimbleness. We won't be able to change the benefits and burdens on a carbon tax approach every 6 months the way we've seen is necessary in other states. So I applaud Washington for heading into a carbon pricing system. For political reasons, they feel like that's what they can do now. I know other members of their elected group feel that carbon cap and trade is probably better, but it's just not the way the political winds are blowing right now. I think that there are great advantages to having a West Coast bloc who are all members of the Western Climate Initiative, because we have attributes, particularly between Washington and Oregon, in our landscapes, our forests and our agricultural lands, and our fisheries, and our reliance on seafood operations, that it makes sense for us to work together and think and come to conclusions together about what would work. And that way we can have greater influence on the WCI. But it's an evolution, and I wish them luck.